the nation's top 5 transfer portal quarterbacks.
Locked On presents The Portal, the daily podcast covering college football recruiting and everything NIL. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Welcome back into the Portal Podcast, where you get your daily recruiting, NIL, and transfer portal news. I'm your host, Brian Smith, longtime college football recruiting analyst and writer. Thank you for making the Portal Podcast your first listen each and every day. Today's show is going to be all about the top 5 transfer portal quarterbacks, and we're going to do this with 3 primary categories to discuss. Number 1, accuracy. Number 2, playmaking. And number 3, experience. So let's get started. Right off the bat, we're going to do 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And I'm also going to talk about a couple of guys that could surprise at the end. But let's also understand that these are Power 4 players. They're going against major competition, and it's not always easy to judge. So look at it from a broad perspective, who's around them, etc. When you think about, well, why would you rank that guy higher than this one? Circumstances also play into that, and that's a caveat for every single ranking that you're going to do. Number 5 on my list is a player that there's been a lot of talk about because of the injury he had last year. There's been a lot of talk about him with his now ex-girlfriend. There's been a lot of talk about him on whether or not he's going to acclimate quickly to his new home. Carson Beck leaves Georgia. He heads to Coral Gables to play for the Miami Hurricanes. Some people have him number 1. Some people also have him as a guy that could help Miami get to the playoff. I don't have him number 1, but number 2 part of that I think is definitely possible. Carson Beck is an experienced player. He's a graduate student. He's a guy that understands what it's like to be in the trenches with the Georgia Bulldogs, going against Bama, playing against LSU, different teams all across the Southeastern Conference that are a big deal. He knows a rivalry game because of the Georgia Tech. He knows Florida game. He's seen just about everything. But what is interesting about him is not only the injury that he had, and I'm sure most of you have seen that video clip. It is awkward. But it's also that he went down from his 23 season to his 24 season. Not just a little bit either. He had 3 games with 3 interceptions in 2024. That's just too many. Here are his stats overall, and they did rely on him. This is, again, the players around you, circumstantial matters a lot. And what I'm about to say, I haven't said this in a very long time, but Georgia's offensive line was mediocre last year. Way below the expectations. They couldn't run the ball as consistently as they wanted. Therefore, they relied on Beck to throw it probably more than they needed to. So 290 of 448, 64.7%, 3,485 yards, only 7.8 yards per attempt. That's a little surprising considering the speed they had, 28 scores. But again, the interceptions really got him. 12 picks. He's a guy that when he goes wrong in a big way. I don't know if it got in his head. I don't know if there was another reason for it. Obviously, Georgia's receivers, again, they had a lot of speed, but they also had some very mediocre hands, and I'm being kind. So he got left out to dry many times. Maybe that's one of the reasons he did push it into coverage more than he should, because he didn't trust some of his players. Can't tell you. All I know is 12 interceptions is a lot, and that's concerning because he regressed from 23 to 24. Now, he's going to a new staff. He's going to have a new system around him, and it's a new start. And I can guarantee you Miami's offensive line, based on everything I've heard and watching them last year and what they got coming back, they'll be better too. So Beck will have a more polished running game to work with, more play action. But the receivers at Miami are very unproven. They lost a bunch. We'll see how that goes. And they also lost their tight end. So some question marks there. And that does play into me not putting him higher. If you had the receivers from last year's Miami team, I'd have him number 1 or number 2, because this still is a team sport. You put all those things together, how productive is he going to be? I think he can get them to playoff, and I think Miami will go 10-2, something like that, and reach the playoff. But I also think realistically that he's a guy that after the injury and after all the different things that have happened off the field, obviously the whole girlfriend situation with Cavendish, I don't know why you would cheat on her, but he did. I'm concerned about him making it through in terms of the mental side of this. You have to be ready to handle yourself in all situations if you're the quarterback at the U. Right now, I don't think he's handled himself as well as he should. Number 4, this is a kid that not many people really know a ton about. Mensah. Darian Mensah is a quarterback that went to Tulane, ended up being the guy, and he's a California kid, but he goes all the way down to New Orleans to play at Tulane, and this is what he did last year. 189 at 287, 65.9%, 2,723 yards, a very nice 9.5 yards per completion attempt, 22 touchdowns, 6 interceptions. If you're over 8, just a little over 8, you're doing pretty good. Over 9 is impressive. 9.5 is really good. Now, I know that that's G5, but still at 65.9%, being a playmaker that could run around and create plays, extend plays, that's good. Beck is a guy that can do that a little bit. Just to compare, he would move around a little bit, and he was accurate enough. But like Mensah, he did it as a freshman. Beck was doing it like he's a senior. And he still had more interceptions. I know it's the SEC. There's no doubt about the different level of competition. But I put Mensah here because usually guys take a big step when they go into their second year as a starting quarterback. And then the third year, they're kind of who they are. Well, Mensah is now at Duke. He transferred there after his one season at Tulane. And he'll have more talent around him, I think, overall. Whether or not that's going to help at receiver, I don't know exactly if they've got what they need there. I would we know. But he's still a good enough playmaker to make you want to think he's going to get that 3 yards when you need him to, and he's not going to throw it to the wrong team. They were 9-3 last year at Duke, though. So there's some pressure on him. We'll see if it ends up working out like I think. I'm banking on him a little more than some people do because he's only going to be a second-year quarterback. But the defense is good. They're not going to put him in bad spots, and he's a playmaker. His accuracy, though, again, 65.9%, 22 touchdowns, only 6 interceptions. That's the better part of 4-1 on that. There's a lot of reasons to like what Mensah has got going on. Next is Fernando Mendoza. Goes from Cal to Indiana. I saw him play last year for Cal against Auburn. At one point, if I remember correctly, they were 7 out of 8 on third downs. He absolutely was threading the needle. So my number one thing with accuracy, there's no doubt. He might be the most accurate short to intermediate passer in the country. Doesn't have a big arm, but he's got enough arm strength to throw an out route. Can he hit that 9 ball on a line? You know, that's a different kind of deal. I don't know, but he could throw it well enough. And he's on time. He understands post-snap progressions. He plays the game more like a West Coast quarterback than about anybody in college football. Smart kid, played down in Miami, at Miami Columbus. Like, he's seen what it is supposed to look like. Now he's going to Indiana. 𝐓𝐡 𝐏𝐿 has a system in place that's already proven. Curtis Rourke was pretty darn good last year after playing at Ohio, if I remember correctly. That's not exactly the cradle of quarterbacks. Goes to IU, has a really good year. If you can get guys like that to work out for you, maybe this is just an extension of it with Mendoza. I'm going off success and after what they've done. And I also put in the pedigree that Nick Saban was once the coach that brought in 𝐓𝐡 𝐏𝐿 and some of these guys. Like, they're looking at it from a progression standpoint of what they did at Bama and other places, and they're just fine-tuning. Indiana's got a couple returning receivers that are good. I think he's going to have a good season. So we'll see how it goes. But last year at Cal, where they didn't have an offensive line and the run game was bad, they had 2 good running backs, but they just didn't open many holes. 265, 386, 68.7%. And that's without a good line. Again, that's pretty impressive. 3,004 yards, 7.8, 16 touchdowns, 6 interceptions. Now, the yards per completion, it's too low, but they just didn't have enough time. He had to check down far too often. Their short passing game oftentimes was all they could do. They just didn't have it. And he's a decent athlete, but he's not going to run around and kill you by any means. He's similar to Carson Beck. I would give Beck the edge in terms of athleticism, but he would make the first guy miss or at least sidestep somebody and release the football. And he would still do it with accuracy. That's a different kind of playmaking than when most people think, yeah, he's not going to be somebody that's going to go out and get you 40 or 50 yards in an NFL game as a quarterback just on undesigned scrambles. But he's also a player that will avoid a couple of sacks a game and move the sticks. That's a different kind of playmaking and one that's pretty darn good. When we come back, we're going to continue on with the countdown and talk about a couple of guys that could surprise as well. That is next here on the Portal Podcast. Ever check your bank account and wonder, where did all my money go? Between dining out, online shopping, and entertainment, it's easy to lose track. That's where Monarch Money comes into play, your personal CFO giving you full visibility and control over your finances. Monarch Money isn't just a budgeting app. It's a complete financial command center. You can track all your accounts, investments, and spending in one place, so you stop just managing your money and start building your wealth. If you look at it from a really broad perspective here, you can just save so much more money because you realize just how much you're spending on food, going out and doing things you don't need to, extra spending at the grocery store, or any other expenditures. Plus, it's an easy thing for you to do with your partner. You can put it under all one place, all your goals, all your financial stuff in one place for you and your partner in one app with Monarch Money. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONCollege at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDONCollege for half off of your first year. This show is also brought to you by our friends over at Nissan. We're all about the stats because numbers don't lie. And when it comes to the all-new Nissan Armada Pro-4X, the numbers are on an MVP level. With the ability to tow up 8,500 pounds, it can quite literally carry the whole team, plus the gear, wherever you need to go. It's powered by a twin-turbo V6 engine, delivering the strength and performance to handle highways, back roads, and everything in between. And with room for up to 8 people, the Armada Pro-4X is built for big crews, big adventures, and even bigger memories. Whether you're exploring off-road trails or rolling up to the arena, the Armada Pro-4X brings power, visibility, and style wherever you go. Take your adventures to new heights in the all-new Nissan Armada Pro-4X. Learn more at nissanusa.com. Miller Moss is number 2 on my list, and this one will probably surprise a lot of people. I have a specific reason for this. As I mentioned with Carson Beck, he got the short end of the stick quite a bit this past season with drop passes at Georgia, etc. No doubt that's a problem. Well, when you have Brom as your head coach, who's a very good quarterback guy and somebody that understands play calling, and you have Isaac Brown in the backfield and just a really well-balanced offense, I think Louisville will surprise at least a few people. I'm not saying they're going to the playoff. I'm not saying that they're going to be dominant, but I think that Miller Moss will be one of the more surprising players in college football. Yes, he lost his job at USC last year, and I'm banking on this to be a little bit of the stunner. Some people don't even have Moss in their top 5, but he has shown times that he can be really good, and he's also shown times where maybe he tried to do too much. With Louisville's running game being consistent and probably having a more balanced offense than what a lot of teams will have, I think he will be a very good player, and he's a veteran too. Accuracy is there when he has a clean pocket. They should be pretty good up front for Louisville. And again, skill position, like handing off to those guys that got in the backfield, Brown in particular, like that is going to get you where you need to go. And he'll be able to benefit with play action and coming up with creativity again from Brom. He's a really good coach. As for the playmaking ability, he'll go get you 5 or 6 yards. He'll extend plays. But more importantly, again, the experience, the offense, and the fit around him, I think it's a great situation for Miller Moss. Louisville should be very, very happy to get him. His numbers last year, he only played 9 games for Southern Cal, but they were pretty good. 233 of 362, 64.4%, 2,555 yards, 7.1 yards per attempt, 18 touchdowns, and 9 interceptions. Now, you look at the 7.1, you're like, what's going on? I just don't think he had a connection with what they were doing. Something was off there because it's not like the USC offensive staff doesn't understand throwing the football. Some of this absolutely goes on Miller Moss, no doubt about it. But they were inconsistent with their ability to run the ball, and they got to the point where they had one guy that was really good at it, but he developed more as the season went on, and their pass game, while it could be explosive, wasn't as consistent as it should be. The game against Penn State, like they bogged down sometimes. I think they got a little bit too aggressive at times. And some of those shots, they will actually hurt your yards per attempt because they're not always realistic. I think USC should have ran the screen game a little more. They had some injuries that really hurt them at running back, etc. So if somebody was out of the lineup at any point in time, they were just inconsistent. And Moss, he didn't overcome it. Maybe I'm wrong, but I think he's going to do a lot better with that this next year at Louisville, and I'm banking on it. My number one guy, that is John Mateer at Oklahoma. Coming off a great season at Washington State, taking over for Cam Ward, who went on to Miami. Mateer is a unique player because he led them in rushing. He was a guy that led them in rushing touchdowns. He had 15 of those. And he was a guy that was just flat out a playmaker. He'll run over a guy, he'll make a guy miss, and he can outrun players. Complete playmaker. Mateer is not a guy that is going to go to Oklahoma and do anything but be the focal point. Can he save the job for the Oklahoma staff? You could probably argue that there's a lot of pressure on Brent Venables this year to get to 7 or 8 wins, despite a really tough schedule. And I'll talk about their schedule momentarily. But at the same time, you also have to think about what this guy did, because Washington State, they don't have a great line. And here are some of the numbers that he had. It's just from a passing standpoint, I'm really concerned about what he can do. But 15 touchdowns rushing, keep that in mind. RPO, look for Oklahoma to be way better in short yardage, in red zone this next year. I think that's the biggest factor. But 224, 347, 64.6%, 3,139 yards, 9 yards per attempt, 29 touchdowns, 7 interceptions. And that's with Washington State's offensive line and skill talent. They had some pretty good receivers. They were underrated, by the way. They deserve more credit. But they still relied on Mateer to take a bunch of hits. He absorbed them. He would run on third down, first down, quarterback draw, quarterback power, RPO, scrambles. He was a pure athlete and a pure playmaker. And he would still be a guy that would throw a dart from the pocket. That's why I have him number one. He's all the above. And he's done it without consistency up front. Like their offensive line, you can ask Cam Ward, they struggled the year before Mateer was there. They weren't necessarily great this past year, but they improved. And he's one of the reasons why. They made it easier in passing situations because instead of 3rd and 8s and 9s, a lot of times the teams get themselves into, he would at least escape, go get you 3 or 4 yards on a 2nd down and long, make it a little more manageable. That's, 3rd and 6 is a lot better than 3rd and 9. Those kind of situations add up. And again, he's still pretty darn accurate. We'll see if he can. Now, here's the interesting part. I mentioned Venables and the staff at Oklahoma. They're on the hot seat. There's not any doubt about that. Can Mateer help Oklahoma win those close games that I talked a little bit about? 3rd downs, red zone, short yardage. This is something to think about. Oklahoma's schedule this year might be the most difficult in the country. This is just ridiculous. If you want to say long stretch of games that are a problem, here you go. They get Kent State after a bye, and that's, kind of nice. But after that, it is full on. There are no games that are going to be easy. They play the Red River rivalry against Texas. The next week, they go to Columbia, South Carolina to play a really talented South Carolina team. Then they come home to play Ole Miss. Lane Kiffin's going to have them rolling. Tennessee in Knoxville. Then they go to Tuscaloosa to play Bama. Then they have a bye week. Then they play Bama. Then they got Missouri at home and LSU at home. So they don't have any games after Kent State that you're like, well, they should win that pretty easy. It's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 games in a row where a team is as good or better than you in terms of their roster. That's incredible. And at the beginning of the schedule, these things get planned out way in advance. The Michigan Wolverines on September 6th will be coming to Norman. Now, we don't know what's going to happen with Michigan and their roster. There's, it's year 2 for that coaching staff, and they finished pretty strong last year. But how's the quarterback position going to be? There's a lot of questions, but that's still another physical game. Mateer at least gives you a chance in all of these, and they've got a good young running back. It's a power player. They obviously beat the bejesus out of Alabama to end the last season. I think they'll take a step forward. They'll finish around 8-4. but that schedule is going to keep them from being any kind of a playoff team, in my opinion. I don't think Oklahoma is deep enough, but without Mateer, I think that Venables and that staff would have no chance of surviving. I think he's a difference maker, and he'll get you 1 or 2 wins just because of his ability alone. When we come back here in just a second, I want to talk a little bit about the surprise players, some of the guys that have an opportunity to make something happen, but we're not sure about it. I want your take on it. That's next here on the Locked On Portal podcast. What do you make of Thomas Castellanos going from Boston College to Florida State? Is this something that you think is going to work out well for them? Is it just going to be okay? Is it going to be a disaster? I've gotten to know him a little bit through recruiting, and when he signed with UCF before he went to Boston College or Florida State, he's a great guy, and he's very dedicated, and he is one of the most twitchy, naturally gifted, and physically strong young men you're going to meet. Thomas Castellanos deserves to be in the freak conversation. He could play running back, quarterback, receiver, corner. He was recruited at all of those different positions out of high school by big-time programs. Clemson, Florida State, Georgia, they all wanted him at something other than QB, so he went to UCF, and now he's matriculated to play with Gus again because Malzahn went from UCF to Florida State to be the OC. How's that going to work out? This is one of the guys that could end up at the end of the year when I do my portal rankings again that I'm like, man, I should have put him higher. But it's a risk. Florida State's coming off a 2-10 season. You have not 1, not 2, not 3, but 4 transfer portal offensive linemen that are expected to start. Will they gel? You got Deuce Robinson coming in. That's a really good thing. You got talent at the running back position. That's one of the spots they're definitely good. They got a really, really good young tight end in Landon Thomas. But is Florida State going to blossom with Thomas Castellanos at quarterback? If you ask Florida State fans, it's a variety pack of different answers. Everybody has an opinion about it, but it's all over the place. I will add one thing. Thomas Castellanos is going to make a lot of plays. But for them to be a good offense and to improve their win-loss record considerably, it's going to come down to one factor. How well the offensive line meshes to give him time to make throws from the pocket. He has a gun. He's going to make plays on the run. That's a lock. If he can make plays from the pocket, down the field, those middle of the field and deep shots, Florida State will be competitive with anybody. If they struggle with pass protection, Florida State will struggle to win 6 games. That's as simple as it gets. Just because you got 4 talented players out of the transfer portal with the offensive line doesn't mean they will work out together. And of course, you got to worry about health. Florida State's depth is concerning. If you give Castellanos time and he feels comfortable week after week, he's going to put up big numbers. Florida State will be bowling again, and they'll probably beat somebody they shouldn't during the 2025 season. I also want to mention a couple other guys that I think could be really, really good. Bo Pribula. Now, this is a unique deal because he had to wait his turn at Penn State, and he had to wait so long. He's like, you know what? I'm not waiting any further. I'm going to go ahead and transfer to Missouri. He only had a chance to throw 35 passes last year, 26 to 35, 74.3%, 275 yards, 7.9, 5 touchdowns, 1 interception. While that's not a great sign per se, everybody at Penn State thought he was going to be really good. It's just he got stuck in the log jam at quarterback. It happens. Missouri's got a good team. Now, I'm not saying they're going to be unbelievable this year because they lost their top receiver to the draft and they lost other key players as well. But maybe Missouri finds a guy that, he's got at least some experience. He's been around that program for a few years at Penn State. Maybe he could be a surprise for Mizzou. Wouldn't shock me, but Missouri's schedule, that's not an easy thing to do. They're going to have to go places all around the country in the SEC on the road. And it's going to be his first year starting. If he ends up being the guy, we'll see if it can work out. One more player, and this is somebody I just hope it works out for him because he's been injured so much and he was so talented coming out of high school. Connor Wegman goes from Texas A&M to the Houston Cougars. Does he stay healthy? He's played in about 10 games over the last 2 years because of injury. Just poor luck. And that's the reason that you just don't know. Houston has some talent, but they're not where they need to be. It's only year 2 for that coaching staff. But can he help lift them up to a point where they're at least good enough to go to a bowl and do something? I think that's possible. He's a Houston area kid. He grew up on the suburbs on the northwest side of Houston. It's going to mean something for him to still be in his home state, for his home city. If Conner Weigman stays healthy, I would not be surprised if he threw for north of 2,500 yards and 20 touchdowns. I don't know if they have enough talent for them to be really good, but I bet you they have at least one, if not 2 games in the Big 12 where they whack somebody if Weigman is healthy, because he's got an arm, he's a big kid, and he understands like the game itself. I've seen him play live. He could spin it, but he's got to stay healthy. Thank you once again for making the Portal Podcast your first listen each and every day. Truly appreciate you stopping in to talk all things recruiting, NIL, and transfer portal. If you would, please hit that like button, that notification bell, and subscribe. We will see you again soon here on the Portal Podcast.